it? Thank you all for coming, and I want to welcome you to this memorial to celebrate the life of the wonderful, outrageous, brilliant Tamara Turner. Our gathering today is hosted by Tamara's partner, Raya Fidel, her brothers, Michael and Ralph, and the organizations to which she dedicated her life, the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women. I'm Andrea Bauer, and I will be your chairperson this afternoon, which is probably obvious at this point. So let me begin by welcoming all the fathers in the room. A very happy Father's Day. On your program, you will see that Tamara's brothers and some of her friends and colleagues will be paying tribute to Tamara. And other guests here today will be welcome to add their own brief remarks after our featured speakers say their piece. And then we hope that you will stay for some refreshments and swapping of stories, lurid and otherwise. My own association with Tamara goes back to 1981, when I started working on the Freedom Socialist newspaper, which Tamara had actually helped to launch in 1976. So for me, what I will always remember when I think of Tamara is the appreciation I have for her as such a fine writer. I am sure you'll hear from speakers about Tamara's humor and her sharp wit, which certainly extended to her writing. But she didn't just bring the funny in intermittent features like Potshots and Ms. Tammy. She was also a gifted writer of serious pieces, and I think perhaps most in this connection of her tribute to FSP founder Clara Fraser on the 15th anniversary of Clara's death, in which Tamara was able to sum up the essence of Clara's life and politics in 1,000 words, which is no small feat, and we will miss her on this count as on many others. And so as we begin to do our best to sum up the life of Tamara Turner, or at least pay tribute, let me introduce our first speaker, her younger brother, Michael Turner. And Michael lived just a 15-minute walk from Tamara in the last couple years of her life and was a huge help to her in many ways. And so he's going to share some thoughts and remembrances.
Can everyone hear me?
I think we're probably
Use the mic?
I think we're probably taping it.
Oh, okay. Well, can you hear me now?
You can put that, but you can put it right here so you don't have to hold it.
All right.
And it picks you up from, you don't have to be super close.
You see, being a Turner, we could shout anyone down, have the last word, and always be right. At least Tamara could. Raya, is that correct? All right. Let's see, our family would like to thank the FSP and Radical Women for organizing Tamara's memorial. Helen Gilbert and Sue Dosical, hope I got that right, have done a wonderful job, as have many others. Most important, we're grateful for all the comrades and friends that sent cards and messages to Tamara from all over the country and abroad. She had phone calls and visits from many of you, and this really helped to brighten her spirits, especially the last 2 months when she was in the hospital. Tamara told me she never had so many people praying to God for her well-being. Wait, from so many non-believers. So anyway. It's a good audience, I like that. Just think if Tamara was doing a review of this event, a critique. So anyway, I'd like to thank, special thanks to Dr. Sheldon Goldberg, who Tamara said kept her afloat for many years and was a dear friend. I'd often ask Tamara about her prognosis or what they'd discuss, and she'd say a minute or two about her medical condition, and then she'd say what he and her talked about, politics, books, mutual friends, this sort of thing. So he was a dear friend. Also thanks to Peggy Schaefer and Joanne Ward, who supported and cared for her during this time. Most of all to Raya, her loving, loyal, patient companion, who was always there for her, right to the end. Thank you, Raya. Doggone it. Try to get through this. Tamara always tried to spare me any unpleasantness. So I know that many of you will be making remarks concerning Tamara's work and involvement with issues through the years and the contribution and impact she had on people's lives. So I'd like to say something about our family and upbringing that helped shape her life. Tamara came from a long line of proud and independent women. Our mother raised the three of us by herself on a secretary's salary, working for the Navy. We were a working class family and didn't have, we had little in the way of material things, but she instilled in us three important ideas. One, distrust authority. Two, not to be prejudiced about people. And three, always to take the side of and fight for the underdog. This was not only for the less powerful among us, but extended to animals as well. Our family has always been animal lovers, and you know about Tamara's cats. My brother Ralph and his wife Carol have devoted their life and resources in fighting for animal rights. They have created the nonprofit Animal Sanctuary outside of Sequim, and if Tamara were here today, she would be soliciting donations on their behalf. What you may not know is our family is all from Wyoming via Jamaica and England. Our grandmother, the matriarch of the family, was one wild, wonderful rebel right out of the West who married a rancher, our grandfather, Walt Putney. He was also called Wat the Watcher because he would lead the Hole in the Wall gang with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid back to his ranch or other hiding places after their robberies. This is all true, and believe me, Tamara had about 30 books on the subject. Tamara was proud of the fact that her people used to rob banks. Wait a minute. Instead of today, when it's the other way around. Gotta wait for the punchline. Our family made yearly trips to Wyoming during our mother's vacation, where we camped, fished, learned to shoot, and basically ran wild. And Tamara, by the way, was a good shot. Since our mother was always working, the three of us learned to be independent at an early age, and we always looked after each other. My sister became like a second mother to me. Growing up and through my life, she always took an interest in what I was doing and learning. She introduced me to classical music, opera. My brother did blues and jazz. And of course, her books and politics. Tamara was not a dilettante in these matters, but passionate about them. Tamara also loved collecting rocks, stringing beads, calligraphy, gardening, the cinema, various art forms, all periods of history, writing, drawing, the list goes on. And then there were the Sounders, Seahawks, and of course the UW women's basketball team, which she all loved. She did all this and more with a debilitating illness and not an ounce of self-pity. Most of all, she cared about people and helped wherever she could. Besides a keen mind and wicked wit, she was fun to be with, and I have many happy memories of the times we spent together. I know that for many of you, Tamara was a comrade, a worker among workers, friend, mentor, perhaps all of the above. But I was most fortunate. She was also my big sister. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was a wonderful way to start us off. Thank you very much. The next person paying tribute to Tamara is Drew Emery, who is a very wonderful writer, director, and filmmaker, and specifically in connection with Tamara, the author of a play called Hidden History, True Stories from Seattle's Gay and Lesbian Elders, which Tamara appeared in, and also In-Laws and Outlaws, a documentary for which he interviewed Tamara. So welcome, Drew. Thank you.
Thank you. Man, I'm a big fan of Tamara, and I'm going to miss her, and I'm already feeling sorry that I didn't spend more time with her, but I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunities I had. By the way, happy Father's Day. I'm not a dad, but apparently I'm a daddy now, so whatever that is. Now, when I'm one of these artist types who, meanders around, spending half their life trying to figure out what's my purpose, what's my goal, what is this all about? And about the time I found my purpose, well, actually, exactly the time I found my purpose was when I met Tamara. And it was through Hidden History. I had just gotten a master's in fine arts as a playwright, had moved to Seattle, up-and-coming theater town, and was gonna, make my name creating dialogue, creating stories, making up the lives of people. And the first play I had the opportunity to work on that was going to have my name on it in Seattle theater was a play that was not of my making up, that was true stories, and it was this Hidden History. I was hired to work in this oral history project, and it sounded very interesting to me, but I didn't really, honestly, I have to confess, didn't really take it seriously as a creative endeavor or having the impact that I wanted to have, that I aspired to have as an artist. And it wasn't until, it wasn't even opening night, it was the first preview at the Broadway Performance Hall, a packed house of probably, since they were subscribers, probably 80% queer folks, and of all ages, and 5 non-performers took to the stage, some of them rather tremulously, and others natural, gifted performers and storytellers like Tamara. And it was very simple and straightforward. They just told their stories, woven together into one collective narrative. And watching how that affected people, hearing from a group that we never heard from in such an unadulterated, open, unedited fashion was really incredibly powerful. And it just awoke in me this amazing sense of mission, of understanding that, oh, it's great having an imagination. It's great to be able to make up things and to aspire to, create other invented realities as a way of telling stories. That's all well and good, but another way of telling stories is to find the stories among us and find out how to bring them out and present them to people. These are stories that we all really need to hear. And not just because, in this particular case, they were lesbian and gay, but because they were elders. And that's the other awakening that happened to me that night, was the recognition of how powerful it was to hear from elders like Tamara. Now, mind you, at the time she was, I think, maybe 51 years old. We had So I'm definitely an elder now. But by the way, when I turned 40, I ran towards it, like with scissors in my hand, gleefully ready to embrace the title of elder, because I had learned through this process what an incredible honor it was to be an elder, to have survived this life, and to have gained the experience that, you become who you are through all of the bustle and tumult of life. Well, I learned that through her story, and her story, as you all are a piece of it, is an amazing story and full of a lot of rich, humorous, and well-informed observation of our society and our history, and she had all that. Now, I mentioned that this was unedited. That was a lie, or I just misspoke. Of course it was edited. That was primarily my job. Has anyone here had the pleasure of trying to edit Tamara? Yeah, let's talk afterwards. Man, okay, so I loved her from the get-go, hearing her story. The way we did it, just so you know, is the late, great director, Patricia Van Kirk, and I were co-creators of this. She was the director, I was the playwright. So it was my job to, story make, to write the play, W-R-I-G-T-H-T, as opposed to W-R-I-T-E. And so, there's a certain craft in how to make this a whole out of these disparate parts. And we didn't want to just have this episodic, here's 5 stories, bloom, 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 and then the end. We wanted the sum of it to be greater than the individual parts. And it started with just oral history interviews. We trained a bunch of volunteers. I think we got 40-something people to sit down one-on-one and have tape-recorded interviews, and then those were transcribed. And by the way, those are all, including Tamara's story, they're all in the University of Washington archives. And then it was my job, then Patricia and I picked 5 people who were willing to tell their stories, and then it was my job to take those 5 stories, weave them together, and edit them down. And we did a bunch of rehearsals and theater games and late-night phone call interviews for me of following up to flesh things out, to fill in the gaps, to find cohesion and unity, to make this thing soar above the individual parts. And Tamara was kind of intimidating. She was really fun to work with. She was great, but this was serious stuff. To be able to get up there and tell her personal story just in a room of the 6 of us was already pretty high stakes, and so she took that very seriously. And when I presented the first draft, there was an anecdote in there that I don't think she intended for the world to hear. She had just told one particular woman who interviewed her, and she sat there and was like, "That will not be in the play." No argument from me. And I felt horrible because I wasn't trying to, put her out there, but it was in your interview, I couldn't help it. So there was one point of disagreement that we had that was difficult for me, that she had, for lack of a better term, kind of a set piece of her manifesto that she wanted to just put out there. And, it was pretty great. And there was very little that I could argue with it, but I'm like, this is not the place to do this, sorry. We're telling story. We're not. This isn't just our opinion piece. That's important, but this is a place to tell story. And we went back and forth about this in my tiny little studio apartment. And, I'm trapped in there during a hot afternoon trying to figure this out with her. And I don't remember what exactly I said that finally turned the key in her head where she had the aha moment, but I did bring her around, and I consider that to be incredible amount, like a huge victory in my life as a creator, was that I managed to persuade her that what she was doing by just telling her story was in and of itself political, incredibly powerful, and so needed. Now here's the thing, when we think about someone like Tamara, as she's heroic. I always thought of her as heroic on so many different levels. And we think of her as, on the ramparts there and unafraid to speak her piece and to stand up to injustice no matter where she saw it. We think of this person as being very strong and brave and courageous. But the thing about courage, for my money, what courage really is, you think the root of the word courage is from the French for heart. And being courageous is really just having a strong heart. And when we think about somebody who has that really tough, very pointed, very well thought out manifesto and the intellect and all that behind it, no argument there. But we forget that behind that, what fuels that, what makes it have such moment and purpose, most of all, is the heart behind it. Tamara recognized from a very early age, apparently, that our common humanity was so incredibly powerful, and it wasn't the problem. We were being divided against ourselves, but it was the common humanity was the solution. And somewhere in there, we found common purpose and put it into the play, and it changed my life. I then had the pleasure of doing another oral history project, this one intergenerational, about 10 years later, called The Bridge. It was a video project. And she was one of the elders, and then we also had gay, lesbian, and trans and bi youth as well. And these were all interviews done individually and then woven together by me via editing to create a cross-generational dialogue. And it wasn't until I did that project that I appreciated how our society at large had been divided against itself in terms of age, and that the value of the elders was repressed. You know, go out there and golf, like the president. You know, go have a second childhood instead of actually living out the traditional role of an elder, which includes being a storyteller. And that the elders were separated from the youth because we're queer elders, we're predatory. So we're not supposed to be around the youth. She told me, actually off camera, so it didn't make it into that piece, afterwards, probably the greatest compliment I can remember receiving about what an impact being part of Hidden History 10 years earlier had had on her. And I had always thought of her as being this brave, tough, knew who she was, and was never going to take any guff from anybody person. But she, I guess I can say, confessed to me that, well, as much as that might be true in so many aspects of her life, when it came to being out, she didn't realize that she wasn't really, really out until she had to stand on that stage and tell her story, and how incredibly liberating that was for her to do it. And it was just liberating to hear that. And this was 91 that when she stood on that stage as a non-performer and told her story. 1991. We're still fighting those basic battles about, are we allowed to be who we are? So go back 26 years and imagine what that battle was like then. And then we toured that